Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to USVA History Review by Standard. I'm glad that you found these videos useful enough to keep coming back and to have made it this far already. I really do hope that they are helping you in your review sessions for either your unit test or for your SOL review. Without further ado, we're going to get right into today's standard, which is Standard 7A and B, which are the causes of the Civil War, major events of the Civil War, and key leaders and their roles during that Civil War. So here is your sneak peek at Standard 7A, the causes of the Civil War. Go ahead and take a picture if you need to. Here is 7B, the major events, and then the key leaders and their roles. Go ahead and take a picture. We're going to continue on right now. So to start off, we have the causes of the Civil War. The first thing that really causes the Civil War is the sectional disagreements and debates over things like the tariffs, the extension of slavery into new territories, and states' rights. Tariffs were those taxes that were put on mostly exports, but also on imports. Both the North and the South did not agree. South did not want the tariff, whereas the North did. The North wanted tariffs to protect businesses here in the United States, whereas the South did not want it for the same reason. However, they didn't want to be taxed on their cotton and tobacco exports to England and France. Extension of slavery into new territories. There are many new territories coming up in the United States during this time, and those in the North did not want slavery going into those territories, whereas the South did. It became a political issue, not an abolitionist issue from the North and the South's perspective. Also, states' rights. The Southern states are really going to claim states' rights issues here because they do not want the federal government telling them what they can and cannot do, specific to slavery there. Northern abolitionists versus Southern defenders of slavery. It's going to be another big one here. Many abolitionists, those who want to completely get rid of slavery, are going to be much more vehement during this time period with the production of newspapers and books, specifically in order to show whites how bad slavery is in the South. Many Northerners had probably never met an African American before, and therefore these books and publications are really going to show the evil that is slavery. Obviously, the South's economy was solely based on slavery and agricultural production, and therefore without slavery the South's economy would completely collapse, and we are going to see that after the Civil War, but they could obviously see that. The next cause is the Dred Scott decision. Dred Scott was a former enslaved African American who spent some time after his slave days in Illinois and the Wisconsin Territory. And once he comes back down to Missouri, where he was from, he thought that he could still be free. Eventually he goes to court, goes up to the Supreme Court, and trying to fight for his freedom. However, it is ruled in the Dred Scott decision that he, being an African American, had no citizenship rights. Therefore, throwing all African Americans down into this untouchables area where they are not citizens, thus making abolitionists and Northerners pretty angry that African Americans could not be considered citizens even if they were free. One of those publications I was talking about earlier is Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin. Uncle Tom's Cabin really puts into light how bad slavery is and how African Americans are coerced into becoming what whites want them to be. This publication was widely read in the North, and more Northerners are reaching that abolitionist threshold and starting to fight against slavery. The next cause is the ineffective presidential leadership of the 1850s, and you can really even start that in the 40s. Presidents during this time were just completely negligent of the slavery issue, trying to pass these compromises that don't work. Compromise of 1850 and the Kansas-Nebraska Act that just don't work, and you have them not taking a stance on slavery either way and just perpetuating the issue and that's really what's going to drive us into seeing Lincoln becoming president in 1860. Failed compromises on the issue, like I just mentioned, the Missouri Compromise that gets overturned, the Compromise of 1850, and the Kansas-Nebraska Act are all going to be failed compromises on the slave issue. Obviously, these are all over the extension of slavery. The Missouri Compromise says that Missouri is the only state above the 3630 line that can become a state that has slaves. No other territory in that region can. The Compromise of 1850 allows Texas to come in as a slave state and California to come in as a free state. And then the Kansas-Nebraska Act are two states that are admitted as popular sovereign states, where the members of each of those states get to vote on whether they're going to have slavery or not. However, you see a lot of corruption, a lot of people going there as squatters, as they're called, to vote on the issue, even if they're not living there, where you see afterwards you see some violent insurrections where people are literally killing each other for a couple of years in Kansas over this slave issue. And then lastly here you have President Lincoln's call for troops in 1861. And this is at Fort Sumter. This is after the Lincoln election, after most southern states had already seceded. There's a base in South Carolina, which was the first state to secede from the Union, called Fort Sumter, and Lincoln says that the Union owns it, and obviously South Carolina says, well, it's in South Carolina, come and get it. President Lincoln calls for troops, and the first shots are fired there at Fort Sumter. Next, we're going to discuss the major events of the Civil War. It's kind of nice. Virginia doesn't want you to know every single battle and who won and who lost, but there are a couple of events that are important for things that are going to happen afterwards. So the first thing is that Lincoln's election in 1860 is really going to cause what will become known as the Civil War, because immediately following, you have South Carolina, followed by 6 other states who are going to secede from the Union, create their own country, because they said that Lincoln was going to abolish slavery. Now, Lincoln never said that he was going to completely get rid of slavery. He said, slave states, you can keep your slaves, we're just not going to extend them anymore. That was a Republican platform. But obviously, the South was not happy with the federal government. They wanted their own rights, and therefore, they create what is known as the Confederate States of America. Talked about this already. The Battle of Fort Sumter is the first battle of the war. That's what you need to know about that. Next is the Emancipation Proclamation, if issued after the Battle of Antietam. Now, to go through this quickly, the Emancipation Proclamation is issued by President Lincoln, and in it, it says that all slaves in rebelling territories, that's in southern states, are going to be freed. Obviously, the South is not going to follow that, but what it does is it makes the war about slavery now. Therefore, no European nation is going to come in on the South side, which was a fear at the time, and also it makes the South fight for slavery. Instead of fighting just to reconvene the Union, they are now fighting over the issue of slavery. Pretty smart man. Also, Gettysburg, the Battle of Gettysburg in Pennsylvania, is a turning point of the Civil War. Lots of bloodshed here. The most casualties of any of the Civil War battles happens here at Gettysburg. It's a big one, too, because it's the first major battle that happens in Northern Territory. It happens in Pennsylvania, and that's kind of scary for the North, and it's good that they won there. And then lastly is Appomattox, the courthouse in Appomattox, where Robert E. Lee surrenders to Ulysses S. Grant. Now, many Southerners believe that Robert E. Lee of Northern Virginia was all on his own here, that this wasn't the actual end of the war, but as we're going to see a little bit later, Lee is going to be able to convince those other Southerners that they really should surrender and stop battling there. The next and last thing that we're going to discuss in this standard is the key leaders and their roles during the Civil War. First is Abraham Lincoln. He was president of the United States during the war, and he believed that the Union should be held together, even if that meant by force. Yes, he was willing to go to war against the Confederacy to keep the Union together, and that is going to be his main goal until the Emancipation Proclamation, which then it becomes about slavery. Jefferson Davis, on the other hand, was the president of the Confederate States of America, former senator from Tennessee, is going to become the president of the Confederate States of America. Ulysses S. Grant is a military leader for the Union. He's going to win very key battles and victories while other leaders had failed. He's the last in a long line of generals that Lincoln is going to hire. The reason he's the last is because he gets the job done finally. Robert E. Lee is a Confederate general from Northern Virginia. Ironically, he didn't agree with secession, but he also didn't believe that the Union should be forcibly kept together. Again, a states' rights guy, believed that the federal government was taking too much power, and but he is going to follow his leader Jefferson Davis into battle. He also urges Southerners to rejoin and unite after he surrenders in Appomattox, and eventually this long drawn-out process called Reconstruction is going to help them come back, though maybe not so happily. And then lastly, we're going to talk about Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass was a former slave who becomes a very prominent abolitionist. He's going to prompt Lincoln to use former slaves as soldiers to fight. He says famously, "Why try to fight a war with one arm tied behind your back?" Essentially saying that the African Americans can help you win this war. Why not let them do that? And Lincoln is going to do that as part of the Emancipation Proclamation. He's going to allow African Americans to fight. As promised, ladies and gentlemen, here is this standards tool to be able to use in order to help you study. You can see that this is a flow chart leading up to the Revolution. Many of the things we talked about today are in here. Some other ones that are just added bonuses for you to be able to study. You can see that there's page numbers here. It's used with the textbook The Americans. Although I imagine if you don't use that textbook at your school, that's okay. You can look up all of these things online. So go ahead. I don't have an answer key for you today, but I do urge you to complete this and use it as a study tool for yourself. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for making it to the end of Standard 7A and 7B. Civil War is a lot of material to know, and it's put in conjunction with Reconstruction, and therefore this standard is massive. There are going to be 2 other videos on this standard that follow this, so stay tuned with that. But I hope this was useful for you. I hope you took a look at that flow chart. And again, go back through this a couple of times, and everything will become very easy to you. Again, thanks for making it, and we'll see you next time.